But they said, stand back. And they said, this fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. Then they pressed hard against the man Lot and drew near to break the door down. But the men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house, both small and great, so that they wore themselves out groping for the door. Then the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of the place. For we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against its people has become great, great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city. But he seemed to his sons-in-laws to be jesting. As morning dawned, the angel urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he lingered, so the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to them. And they brought him out and sent him outside of the city. And as they brought them out, one said, escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away. And Lot said to them, oh no, my lords. Behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Behold, the city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my life will be saved. He said to him, behold, I grant to you this favor also, that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Escape there quickly, for I can do nothing till you arrive there. Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the city and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley. And he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. Now Lot went up out of Zoar and lived in the hills with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. So he lived in a cave with his 2 daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger, our father is old. There's not a man on earth to come in to us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve offspring for our father. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she arose. The next day the firstborn said to the younger, behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve offspring for our father. So they made their father drink wine that night also. And the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites to this day. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Would you bow your heads with me for a word of prayer? Lord, as we see such a sin-filled passage, we just see the depravity of man, just the condition, the fallen nature. Lord, would you remind us of your mercy? Would you remind us that this isn't the end goal, that there is a silver lining even in the darkness here? And so would you allow us to see it? Would you help us to see that you yourself are the greatest silver lining, that in the midst of chaos, confusion, wickedness, and sin, that your word prevails, that you, O Lord, prevails, that your plans will come to pass, and not a single person that you have chosen will be lost. And so would you help us, Lord, to see this truth more clearly, to see how merciful you are, how loving you are, despite the wickedness, the sin-filled passage that we read. And so give us encouragement, give us insight, give us just a rejuvenation for our cold and dead hearts. And I lift up all these things in the strong name of Christ, we pray. Amen. As I said in the beginning, this week's chapter is the conclusion to the last week's chapter. And so we get to see whether or not Sodom and ultimately further Gomorrah is judged faithful or is judged sinful and doomed for destruction. And having already read the chapter, I'm sure you can already guess what the answer is. And so I don't think my headings will be any much of a spoiler for you. And so we're going to actually look through this passage under two headings, right? The first heading, it's going to be sinful Sodom. Hopefully that's not a spoiler. And it actually makes sense just having read the passage itself. We're going to see how sinful Sodom is in the first 14 verses. And for the rest of the chapter, from 15 all the way down to verse 38, we're going to see Lot's loss. Just what exactly does Lot lose, even in the midst of his quote-unquote salvation? Right? And so again, we're going to look at sinful Sodom, and then we're going to look at Lot's loss for the remainder of the chapter. And so without further ado, let's head into the chapter itself, starting in verse 1. Whereas last week we saw that these angels, they were described as messengers of sort, that there were three men who were traveling. That's how last chapter opened up. Our first verse this morning, it's actually even more explicit, right? It's two angels that came to Sodom in the evening. And there's probably multiple reasons why the author chose to make it so explicit. One reason is because the word itself, it does mean angel. Later on, because the angels actually do reveal this about themselves. But perhaps the most interesting thing is that they arrived in Sodom in the evening. If we remember back to chapter 18, these two men, they came at the hottest point of the day, when the sun was hottest, right? When the sun was highest, I mean. And at that time, you would say it's about noon. And typically, how long would you spend siestaing or fiestaing, whatever it took for the sun to go down? Probably a couple hours, right? And so most likely, by the time they're actually leaving Abraham, it's hitting roughly maybe 3 o'clock, perhaps on the later side, 2 o'clock on the earlier side. And yet, these angels were able to make it to Sodom by evening. Although the location of Sodom is a little up in the air. After all, it was completely destroyed. If we were to examine kind of the possible locations, it seemed to be on either two tips of Canaan, right? It was either on the northern end, which is about an 18-mile trip, or it was on the southern end, which makes it a 40-mile trip. In either case, these two angels, they were able to traverse 18 to 40 miles in the span of a couple hours. It's not something that you would imagine was humanly possible, especially if you're thinking 40 miles, right? That is quite a run at the best. And so the author, he's not even hiding the fact that these are angelic beings from the beginning. And yet, when they arrive at Sodom, we see that Lot, he's sitting at the gate of Sodom, right? Typically, people would sit at the gate towards the end of the day, perhaps if travelers were to come in order to show hospitality, or in order as guards. There could be other roles they could be playing. Another reason Lot could be at the gates is because he's some sort of judge or chief that everyone, right? You bring your cases to the gate of the city and it's judged there. But whatever reason it is, Lot is probably not sitting alone. It's not a location that you would sit and wander and wait by yourself. And so with that in mind, it is surprising that only Lot rises and actually goes to meet these two angels. Whereas everyone else at the gate of the city, they remained seated. They didn't care whether or not these two visitors came. Lot, he immediately rose, right? He rose to meet them. And not only did he rise to meet them, he bowed his head to the ground. Although bowing yourself was typical, especially in showing hospitality, to bow your head all the way to the ground, that is almost an excessive show of submission, of hospitality, which seems to indicate that even Lot was able to discern something of the nature of these two men. He saw them as very important, that he had to bow his head to the ground. And what does he say to them? He says, my lords, right? Not in the sense of Yahweh, Lord, but as in the sense of Adonai, master, sir, right? An honorable, respectful term given to people of higher standing or in a more respectful position. And not only does he call them lords, he actually pleads them to turn aside and come to his house, right? He's asking them, would you stay at my house, your servant's house? He puts himself in a very humble posture. We see a lot of Abraham and Lot at this moment, right? Not only does he imitate this respectful gesture, what he says is respectful. How he refers to himself is respectful, right? And even the offering, what he gives them is very respectful, but we'll come there in a second. We see that he tells them, right, you can spend the night, wash your feet, and then you can go up early and out of your way. What Lot doesn't recognize, though, is why these two men have come in the first place. Lot, he sees these two angels, right? And he assumes that their journey, their destination is not Sodom, but to go beyond Sodom. There's no hint of an outcry. There's no hint of maliciousness, wickedness in Lot's tone. There doesn't seem to be any sense of urgency at all. At least not on the surface level. It is interesting that these two men, they actually declare, no, we're going to spend the night in the town square. And this is pretty normal. Normally, if you go to any city, if you're unable to find a house, you would spend the time in the town square. You would spend the night in the town square. Everyone would wear 2 layers of garments. The first one was an undergarment, which you use for sleeping. And the over one was like a cloak of a sorts. You could use it as a blanket, keep the weather away. And so any traveler would be wearing double layered, and they'd be accustomed to sleeping outside. And so it's even more alarming that in verse 3, he actually presses them strongly. Lot insists that they come to his house. He insists that they don't stay in the town square. Again, what do we make of this? On the one hand, we can say, Lot, he's such a hospitable guy. Even though it was norm for people to spend time in the town square, a night in the town square, he's insisting, going out of his way to persuade them to spend the night comfortably in his own household. But on the other hand, perhaps there is a little warning from the narrator as well. Why is it dangerous to spend the night out in the open? Perhaps there's more to Lot's urgency than meets the eyes. But before we get there, we're actually lulled right back down. The author, he says that Lot, he made a feast for these individuals. Unlike Abraham in the last chapter, where it doesn't actually describe it as a feast, but it describes the contents of the feast, the quality of the feast, For Lot, the author, he's talking about the quantity of the feast. There might not be as much different ingredients, but there is an abundance of food laid out before them. Specifically, there's an abundance of baked unleavened bread. And so these gentlemen, they get to eat. They eat with Lot. Lot enjoys the food with them. But we see in verse 4, before they go down to sleep, actually, this is when the trouble arises. This is when the problem that Lot was trying to avoid happens in the first place. We see, but before they lay down, right, verse 4, the men of the city, and it's not just some of the men, right? The men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man surrounded the house. The extent of the wickedness of this place is just alarming. There's not a single man who is absent at this moment. Normally, Hebrew narratives don't go out of its way to describe something. Usually, it gives the briefest amount of details. And so for the narrator to give not only the fact that these are the men of Sodom, but that from young and old, all the people to the last man, 3 details to specify what he meant when he described the men of the city surrounding the house. We should probably take this quite literally. There is a surprising, if not the entire city, gathered around surrounding Lot's house. And so what do they want? What do they want with Lot? We see in verse 5, right? They called out to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them." Perhaps the reason that they're able to know that Lot has guests is because Lot wasn't alone in verse 1, right? Again, everyone's sitting out there. And so whereas they weren't willing to offer up hospitality, the news traveled quite quickly. Oh, Lot has guests in his household. And so perhaps, actually, this is what I find strange. The way that they describe it, right? Bring them out to us. Bring these 2 men out to us that we may know them. It actually sounds quite innocent on the first layer, right? That we may know them, right? Let's get to know them. That's what we do with one another. Let's hang out, get to know one another. That's the first level, the most innocent level to interpret this passage. If we go a step deeper, knowing has to do with sexual relations. Normally in Scripture, right, when a man gets married to a woman, he knows his wife, right? He has relations with his wife, and that's how children are produced. It's not an exchange of just intellectual information, but of physical bodies as well. And so on the second layer, perhaps this has a sexual undertone to it. Or I guess technically a more homosexual undertone to it. But then if we go even a third step deeper, it can actually become even more malicious. It's not just you want to intellectually know this person. It's not just that you want to physically know this individual. It can go on to extreme as abusing such individuals, right? Some translations would say something like rape, right? Or to abuse, to humiliate, right? This is probably the deepest and most heinous level that this term "know" can refer to. And so our question this evening is, which level should we interpret their demand? Is it the innocent first layer? Is it the more malicious second layer? Or is it the third layer of just straight up abuse? Actually, just reading the text itself helps us figure out which it is. First of all, Lot himself explains what it is, right? In verses 6 and 7, Lot, he goes out to the men, right, who are at the entrance of his door. And not only does he go out, he actually shuts the door behind him. He's actually putting himself in between his guest and the assailants of sorts. And so Lot, he's acting like a mediator, perhaps a good show of Lot's character. And then verse 7, right, what does he say? Not only does he stand as a mediator, he says, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly." Lot even defines their act, their desire, as wicked. And so we can probably rule out that this isn't the first layer request. This isn't that they want Lot to just simply let them introduce themselves to these 2 men. It's more wicked, but is it the second or the third layer? Well, unfortunately, Lot is more intricate than we first imagined, right? Yeah, even the request is a little more tricky. When we see verse 8, right, Lot, he specifically says, "Behold," right, "look clearly, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you, and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." If we have a very negative view of Lot, what Lot is suggesting is, oh, don't abuse my 2 guests. Rather, you can abuse my 2 daughters. That's the most negative view of Lot we can have. if we have a little bit better view of Lot and it's still quite negative, we're at the second layer, right? Don't have these homosexual relations with my two guests. Rather, keep it a little less wicked. You can have heterosexual sex with my daughters. Something along those lines, right? It depends how we want to view Lot. And it seems from verse 7, the fact that Lot recognizes that this is wicked. We want to lean towards a more positive view of him having his own view of his daughters. Lot's not just offering up his daughters that they would just abuse, but he's offering them up as a replacement of sorts. It is hard to defend this given the fact that he does say, do to them as you please. But it doesn't seem to be as malicious as it stands, so to speak. Rather, it seems Lot's concern, it's actually not on what they want to do to the two men. Actually, surprisingly, although this seems to be the question on the minds of the men of Sodom, for Lot, he has a different concern in view. He doesn't quite care what happens between the two parties. What he wants to defend is one thing and one thing only. It's his guest, right? Again, verse 8, it doesn't simply say, hey, here's my daughters, do whatever you want with them. He actually gives a reason. He says, only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof. And we do need to unravel Lot's morality a little bit. It does sound really weird that he would care more about these two strangers than his own blood daughters. But if we know anything about ancient Near East hospitality culture, you would know that hospitality is actually something it should have been a cultural norm. It should be something universally accepted amongst the ancient Near East. If there is someone who's sojourning, someone who's in a journey, you do offer a hand. You do allow them to stay in your home. There's no being alarmed. This was just normal. And yet there's another layer to it. Even idol worshipers, even idolatrous people, they actually had a hospitality code that was defined by their gods. Those who would actually betray the trust of those who came under your shelter, under your roof, you would actually be punished by the gods themselves. And so it's actually a fearsome thing to allow anything to happen to your guest, because that meant the gods were now against you. Not only do you offend or you betray the trust of men, you actually betray the trust of the gods themselves. And so perhaps this is the influence that's come upon Lot. After all, Lot, he has been spending quite a bit of time in Sodom, perhaps a little over 20 years. Lot has become quite the wicked man himself. His morality has shifted quite a bit himself. And again, you can point back to verses 6 through 8. He recognizes that this is wicked. Their request to harm his guest, this is wicked. But he doesn't recognize that his own compromise is wicked as well. He doesn't recognize that it's equally wicked for him to offer up his daughters as a replacement for his guest. At the end of the day, Lot, he's picking between the lesser of two evils. What is more correct for him? What is most important? Is it the principle of hospitalities that could anger the gods themselves, that could show him to be an offender amongst all men? Or is it the principle of being a household leader, of being a father? Ultimately, Lot has to put those two things on a scale. And it seems the answer is quite clear. The principle of hospitality was of more importance to Lot. He cared more about what would happen to himself because of what would happen to these guests. And so interestingly enough, even though Lot, he wants to go out and stand between the men and his guest, he has no power to do so, nor does he even have the right stance to do so. The fact that he's standing there, it seems he's standing there for the completely wrong reasons altogether. And unfortunately, it's not just Lot who has Such a weird view. Even these men, right? If we look at verse 9, we see that Lot's request, it actually angers them. It doesn't appease them in any way, shape, or form. Even though Lot seems to be trying to protect his principle of hospitality, whatever that may be defined as. The men, right? They're actually protecting their own honor, right? Verse 9, but they said, stand back. This fellow, referring to Lot, right? Lot, he came to sojourn, right? He's a guest. He's not a native by right, by birth. He's a guest in our own land. And what has happened? Lot has become the judge now, right? He's placed himself over them. Even though Lot is a guest to the city, somehow Lot has placed himself as the judge of the city. And what would make them say such a thing? Most likely it's what Lot says in verse 7. My brothers, do not act so wickedly. You see, Lot, he wanted to judge their acts, right? He wanted to say, this is wicked. He wanted to define what wickedness is. And yet, Lot himself doesn't even know what wickedness is. And so surely these men, when they see such a ironic, almost foolish act, they can't help but become angered by him. Lot himself is plenty wicked, plenty like the men of Sodom. And yet Lot is going to judge the men of Sodom? It doesn't make sense to them. And it makes them so angry that they're going to deal worse with Lot than with the two men in the beginning. Whereas before, this was a mob that was simply verbally aggressive. Now they've turned physically aggressive. Right at the end of verse 9, they pressed hard against the man Lot. They drew near to break the door down. They're getting ready to just take whatever they want at this point. It doesn't matter what Lot wants. It doesn't matter what Lot's sense of justice is. Lot, he doesn't have the power to carry out his own sense of justice. And in verses 10 through 11, there is a sense of irony. Right? Whereas in verse 9, it says they pressed hard against the man Lot. Or that is, they pressed their hands against the man Lot. Right? Their hands are reaching out to the man Lot. We see in verse 10, the other men, the two angels, they also reached out their hands to Lot. Rather than pushing, they pulled him and they brought Lot into the house with them. And they shut the door. Naturally, actually, I shouldn't say naturally. This actually reminds us of Noah's ark, right? When God, he placed Noah, he allowed Noah and all the animals to go into the ark. It was actually not Noah who closed the door himself. In fact, it was actually impossible to close the door from the inside. God had to physically shut the door in. It was a sign of judgment, so to speak. Those inside are safe, and those outside are to be judged. And seeing this, it's actually quite a scary picture. We see a preview of the judgment in verse 11. Before they're struck dead, the angels, these two men, they actually struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house, both small and great, so that they wore themselves out groping for the door. Before they were judged or executed, before they were sentenced to death, they were sentenced to blindness. That is, whereas they might have been spiritually blind before, as they were living licentiously, living wickedly as they pleased, not knowing that the judge, the one that was carrying the seal of the judge, these two angels were there waiting. Now they were physically blind. They were groping around, looking for the entrance. You could say this is a humiliating, almost depressing picture of the world. You see, everyone is groping around for the answer, the door of salvation, right? If the imagery of Noah's ark is being played out here, right? The door right now that's sealed shut. This is the entrance to salvation. And there's not a single person who's physically able to, who's capable of even seeing the door itself. They're simply left groping, blindly seeking the answer. And yet, beautifully in verse 12, we see that what's impossible with man, right? No one outside the door could actually reach themselves in. It is possible the other way out. Although it's impossible to go into the house, it is possible to reach out from the house. In verse 12, the men, these two angels, they said to Lot, have you anyone else here? Is there anyone else who belongs to you? And it's not that these angels, they were unaware of whether or not Lot's family, this was everyone. Clearly from the fact that they start off in such a weird order, right? They start off with sons-in-laws, even though Lot had just described that his daughters had not known any man, right? These were virgins. They were not married. And yet the first group of people that the angels ask is sons-in-law. It seems to indicate that the angels knew, but now they were giving Lot a chance to go save them. It's an act of mercy, not just curiosity. The angels are aware of Lot's situation, and there's mercy through Lot at this point, right? But it doesn't stop there. Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone else you have in the city, bring them out of the place. If this city is going to be judged, right, and there's no entrance to salvation at this point, the door is locked, yet the angels are allowing Lot to go out and save as many as belong to him, as many as have a relationship to him, even if that relationship is superficial, as not yet sons-in-laws. Not only that, if you remember Lot, he does have quite a bit of wealth. He had a lot of slaves. That's what he brought into Sodom. Perhaps they're also mentioning these slaves as well. Whether or not Lot had other sons and daughters, it doesn't seem likely. Whoever they're referring to, it's unclear. But the point being, right, verse 13, the plan is being revealed. This is what is about to happen, Lot. Therefore, you have to now go into this dying city, the city that is about to be destroyed, and save as many of you that have a relationship with you as you can. Right, verse 13. For we're about to destroy this place, because the outcry against this people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us out to destroy it. Right? The outcry that the Lord was to judge in the previous chapter. That Abraham actually negotiated with the Lord in order to drop the number, the requirement, in order to save the city. It seemed that it was pointless. There's not even 10 righteous people in all the city. Not only Sodom, but it seems to be including Gomorrah as well. All the cities connected to these two large cities. There weren't 10 righteous men, righteous individuals in the entire city. It's a rather depressing remark. And yet Lot, he goes out in verse 14. He goes out to his sons-in-laws, right, or his sons-in-laws to be, who are to marry his daughter. And what does he say? He says, up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city. But unfortunately, this warning, it falls on deaf ears, right? For the sons-in-law, it seemed to be that Lot was joking. He was jesting, that he was playing around. Perhaps to better understand this irony is the fact that all the men of the city are outside Lot's door right now, right? It said not a single person was excluded. So specifically, not even Lot's sons-in-laws to be would be excluded. These sons-in-laws who are about to marry his daughter, right? Lot, he goes outside the door, looks around the people groping on the ground, and he finds these two sons-in-laws to be. And he tells them, get up, you blind men, get up and get out of this place, right? This city is about to be destroyed. And having witnessed the fact that they are blinded miraculously, it doesn't stop them from actually thinking clearly. They still think that Lot is joking. And why would it be that they would actually look down upon Lot? Why are they not believing Lot's words? I think the answer is the same reason we don't really trust Lot's words either. In verses 6 through 8, remember, Lot, he's made himself absolutely clear to not only all the men of Sodom, but to even his two sons-in-laws. His sense of right and wrong is so skewed himself. He's equally blind as these men. Right? He's so able to say that you guys are wicked. And yet he's able to do something just as wicked, offering up his own sons and daughters. His two daughters. And so having seen that, perhaps these two sons-in-laws, they're assuming that Lot himself is equally blind. Of course, they're blind, so they can't know for sure themselves. But he has just offered up their future wives, so to speak. There's no reason for them to trust Lot's words anymore, right? If he's unable to keep the sanctity of their future marriage, right? How could they possibly trust his words now? Lot is made out to be a liar in their eyes. He seems to be a jokester, someone who's untrustworthy, someone who's foolish. And a lot of times we ourselves do this very same thing. We want to share the good news. And yet our words are so twisted. Our sense of morality is so wrong that no one can believe us as well. And so what do we do in this situation? As we examined the sinful condition of Sodom, the hopelessness of Sodom, that even two men that were given the option of salvation decline it, despite having proof through blindness. Is it impossible for anyone to be saved in the city? Well, the answer is no, it isn't impossible. What's impossible with man is possible with God. And so we turn now to the second half, the remainder of the chapter, as we see what does Lot lose as he's saved from destruction. We see in verse 15, the scene is continuing forward. It's been quite a night. Morning is rising up. The night has passed. The darkest hour has passed. And now the angels are actually giving Lot the same advice that he gave to his two sons-in-laws. Up, get up. Why are you waiting around? Take your wife and your two daughters who are here, lest you be swept up in the punishment of the city. For some reason, despite everything Lot has seen, even Lot has fallen susceptible to doubt. Right? You see it even more clearly in verse 16. Despite the fact that there is a possibility of destruction, he lingers a little longer. He continues waiting. It's to the point that these two men, these angels, they actually had to seize him, grab him by the hand, him and his wife and his two daughters by the hand. And what does it describe it as? It's the Lord being merciful to him as they brought him out and set him outside the city. They miraculously bring him out of the city, outside the walls. And the passage, the narrator reminds us that this is the Lord's mercy. What does this mean? It means that even Lot, he didn't deserve this, right? Everything that's happening to this point, the destruction of all the Sodomites, even if it was the destruction of Lot himself, all of that is actually justice. It's actually the right thing that should have been done, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't be merciful to him. The Lord wouldn't be merciful to him to spare him from judgment despite his sins. But the question is why? Why is the Lord merciful to Lot? We'll see the answer in a few, towards the end of the chapter. And so we'll continue forward, right? They not only brought him out in verse 16 and 17, they tell him again, once more, escape for your life. Don't look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away. They're giving him one more final advice. You can't look back. No matter what, keep going, don't stop. If you want to be saved, there is no turning back. There is no looking back. There is no stopping anymore. It's a one-way track. And yet Lot, he actually does stop them. Ironically, in verse 18, Lot, he says to them, "Oh no, my lords." Again, in his respectful tone, "My sirs, oh no, sorry, I can't accept this." He says, "Behold," right, take close look. Your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die." It's interesting that even though the angels have specifically told him what needs to happen in order to be saved, all he has to do is keep going forward. Don't look back. Don't stop. Lot, he doesn't trust the angel's words, even at this point. Even after being saved out of the city, even being saved out of the hands of the Sodomites, Lot's still unable to trust that what they're saying is true, even though he believes that the destruction itself is possible. It is true. And he gives a compromise once more. Lot, our compromising friend, he says, "Behold, this city," referring to Zoar, "it's near enough to flee to. It's a little one," right? It's insignificant. How bad could their sins be? How many people could be there that it's worthy of destroying? Right? Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my life will be saved. Just like we saw Abraham negotiating with God in the last chapter, we see that Lot begins to negotiate with the angels. And interestingly enough, just as Abraham was able to actually succeed, that his negotiations actually came to pass. Likewise, in verse 22, we see that the angels actually agree to his request, right? "Behold, I grant you this favor also." And he goes, not only does he agree, he goes as far as reminding him, "I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken." And to make it even more clear, in case Lot has any more doubt in his system, escape there quickly, for I can do nothing till you arrive there. Right? It's not that Lot is withholding their power. It's not that because of Lot they're unable to exercise their power. It's that because of Lot, they're willing to wait. Because of Lot, they're willing to not destroy the city. They're willing to show mercy to the entire city set for destruction, just so Lot can make it to safety. Again, we see tremendous mercy. Lot, he didn't need to be saved from the start. And yet, not only do they save him, not once, not twice, they even convince him, comfort him, encourage him so that Lot can actually trust them. It's amazing that Lot, despite the fact that he's so wicked himself, that these angels, they're going out of their way to encourage him, to help him believe and to trust. And we see that the sun, right, in verse 23, it kind of switches the pace up a bit. As the sun rises, right, the dawn has come, the sun is now rising. It's the beginning of the day. As the sun had risen on the earth, Lot finally arrived at Zoar. He finally hit his destination. And in verse 24 to 25, despite the length of the chapter, we only see 2 verses of destruction. Right? Verses 24 to 25 is the only time we actually see the extent of the destruction itself, the extent of the Lord's wrath in judging these 2 cities. And what does it say? The Lord, he rained on Sodom and Gomorrah, sulfur and fire from the Lord out of the heaven. Similar again to the Noah's ark. Just as the Lord, he rained water, and he flooded the earth. This time the Lord, he's raining down sulfur and fire from the heavens. Lest anyone were to think that this was a miraculous act, that this natural disaster, the author makes it clear twice. It's the Lord who did this. It's the Lord who destroyed both Sodom and Gomorrah because of their wickedness. Right? He overthrew, verse 25, he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. We see not only the manner in which the Lord destroyed these 2 cities by raining down fire and sulfur, we also see the extent of the destruction. He overthrew the cities, the inhabitants of the cities, everything that grew on the ground. There was a complete loss of life in these locations, these cities. There's nothing that survived. And unfortunately, it's not just Lot's possessions that are destroyed in the city. It's not just Lot's house that's destroyed in the city. We see in verse 26 that Lot also loses his wife. Because Lot's wife, what did she do? She was standing behind, probably in the back of the group where no one was watching. And for a moment, she looked back and she became a pillar of salt. She was judged because she looked back. And it's not saying that it was a sense of curiosity, as if something startled her and she happened to look back. The fact that the Lord had warned them, don't look back. This is an act of defiance. This is an act more than curiosity. Remember, where did Lot meet his wife? Most likely in the city, most likely amongst the Sodomites. When Lot split from Abraham, he was single, he was an orphan, and yet he slowly inched closer and closer to Sodom. And as he grew closer and closer to Sodom, he got accustomed to Sodom. He has a family in Sodom. His way of thinking, his way of life, it's become just like the Sodomites. Lot has lost not only his possessions, his house, everything he brought into Sodom, even what he gained, his wife. And even his sense of morality seems to have been corrupted. And yet this isn't just the extent of Lot's loss. We'll see the rest of it at the end of the chapter. But before we get there, there's actually a brief moment where our protagonist appears. Abraham, right, in verses 27 to 28. He came out early in the morning, right? This was the first thing that he did. He knew, and he went to the place where he had spoken. He had stood before the Lord, the place where he negotiated with the Lord to save these two cities, to intercede for these two cities. And when he looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah, what did he see? He saw the smoke. Behold, the land went up like a smoke of a furnace. What did Abraham end up seeing? It's refinement language, right? The smoke of a furnace. It's when some impurities go through fire, right? That's what the furnace is used for. That's what often the furnace illustration is used for in the Bible. And now the Lord, it wasn't that the Lord was unjust. It wasn't that the Lord was killing innocent people. The Lord was cleaning. He was refining. He was actually making things right and destroying these two cities. And we see this all the more clearly in verse 29. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, right? God remembered Abraham, and he sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. The reason that the Lord was merciful to Lot, it wasn't because Lot was worthy of being saved. It wasn't because Lot was any better than the Sodomites themselves, nor his family or any relative to him. The reason that Lot was saved, the reason that God was merciful to Lot, was because he remembered, he looked, or he remembered his chosen person, his mediator. God, he didn't save Lot by looking at him. He saved Lot by looking at another person. And you can see how this illustration actually draws us to Christ, right? It actually shows us the extent of God's mercy, because it's the same for us as well. Just for us, we're no different from Lot. We're no different from the Sodomites. We may hide our sins better, but in some ways we're more wicked. Whereas the Sodomites, they waited to the darkest hour because they at least had the shame of hiding. Yeah, right now, there's a lot of sins in this world that we do quite in the open. We don't hide them anymore. We live them. We embrace them. The world has become, in some ways, worse than Sodom. Whereas Sodom did its wicked acts in night, yeah, we do it in the daytime. We embrace it even. And yet, the Lord, he doesn't look at your sins. He doesn't look at my sins. That is, he doesn't count them against us. Rather, he remembers Christ, his Son, his perfect righteousness, and not our wickedness. And so what do we make now of the remaining 8 verses, right? This is probably the most surprising or chaotic part of the chapter. We see that in verses 30 to 38, if I were to just summarize it, Lot, he's ended up going exactly where the angels had told him to go in the first place. He's afraid of living in cities now, despite having spared Zor. He's no longer staying there. He's living in the hills where the angels had directed him in the first place. Lot, he keeps changing his mind. Where is he to go? And it's just Lot and his two daughters. Right? Again, the narrator reiterates this fact twice. And the daughters, we realize it's not just Lot who's learned a lot of wicked things from Sodom. His daughters are a product of Sodom themselves, right? They actually allow, right, the firstborn, she convinces the younger to make their father drunk so that both of them can become pregnant. In verse 31, their reasoning is that their father is old, right? He's not going to get married anytime soon. There's not going to have other sons that they can marry. And there's not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of all the earth. Not to say that there's no more men left on earth. It's not, right? They did live in Zor after all. The point is, there's not a man who's going to take these two daughters now, right? They're penniless. They're living in caves. They're homeless. If Lot the orphan was a terrible candidate for marriage, who's going to take his daughters now when he doesn't have a cent to his name, when they're living like bums in the caves? They're living like wild creatures now. Right? There is no hope to get married after the manner of all the earth. What's normal in the world is no longer applicable to their marriage. That's their fear. And so they hatch this plan. The father gets drunk, and for 2 successive nights, they trick him and they become pregnant. The older son or the older grandchild of Lot is Moab, and the younger grandchild is Ben-Ami, the Ammonites, right? It's two people that are actually extremely wicked and extremely hostile to Israel, despite having been related to Israel through Lot and Abraham. Despite the fact that Abraham showed such mercy to Lot, their grandfather, we see that because of the Ammonites, because of the Moabites, Israel will suffer in the future. And so how do we make sense of this story? Why not just destroy them? Why allow the people that would actually afflict God's chosen individuals to survive? Well, the answer is actually beyond the book of Genesis. We'd have to go all the way to the book of Ruth, where we see that despite the fact that the Moabites, they have this wicked and twisted tradition, that there is one Moabite woman who's actually faithful, who's actually able to be saved. And if we look at such a broader perspective of the passage, it actually gives us a lot of hope, even in our time today. Again, just like the men of Sodom who did their acts in darkness, who did it when no one else was watching, right? They weren't able to do it. They still had the shame to get their father drunk. They couldn't do it without the assistance of alcohol. And yet, we see that even in this wickedness, even in this depravity as these two sons are born, that their destination, if it's allowed to follow the trajectory of the world, if it's simply because of the world's wisdom, the world's sense of justice, yeah, they're going to turn out just like their father, their grandfather Lot. They're going to turn out just like their mothers, right? Those daughters of Lot. They're going to turn out just like the Sodomites. And what is the end goal? They're going to be destroyed as well. And yet, mercy is on the horizon. Remember, in the midst of all of this, there is a promise that's given to Abraham, that through Abraham, who is the mediator of God's blessing to the world can be blessed through him. The world can actually come to know God. That's the answer to all of our problems here. If we see Lot as not just an individual, his family, not just as one family, but as the trajectory of this whole world, when we see such a larger scale of the world, we see that salvation is possible. It may not happen immediately. For Moabites, it didn't happen until many generations afterwards, nearly 400 years plus, until Ruth is actually saved, until God actually redeems this one family. And yet it is possible. Again, what is impossible with God, what's impossible with man, it's surely possible with God. God's mercy is the answer to even the greatest depravity. Again, this chapter, it doesn't actually dwell upon destruction. It actually dwells upon depravity. And just as much as it depends and dwells upon depravity, it equally dwells upon God's mercy. That's the key thing to remember here. That God, he remembers that anyone can be saved if they turn to the Son, the child of promise, the one true mediator of God's blessing to the world. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we just thank you that our salvation, it's not just going to the hills. Lord, if we were like Lot, how could we possibly make it to the hill? How could we possibly save ourselves from destruction? But we thank you that salvation is from him who descends the holy mountain, who descends the holy hill, the author of salvation, the one who declares our God reigns, Yahweh reigns. That we can have a relationship with you, that you have not abandoned us to our sins, our own sense of depravity, or our own sense of fallen justice. Lord, we thank you that whereas we were unable to make it safely even to salvation, that it's Christ who would come down and carry us through, the one who would grab our hands by having his own hands pierced, that his hands would be nailed to the cross so that we can be handed down mercy and salvation. Lord, would you allow us to turn to him? Would you remind us of the greatest comfort, that it's not the extent of our sins, Lord. None of our sins can possibly separate us from you, because you willingly have chosen to forget our sins as you turn yourself, as you remember, as you look towards your Son. And so would you help us to know him, to trust in him as our Redeemer, our only source of salvation. And we lift up all these things in the strong name of Christ we pray. Amen.